Husband caught his wife cheating on camera and took immediate revenge, uncovering a deeper betrayal. Tuesday evenings were consistently busy, particularly on the second Tuesday of each month, when I had my Kawas Club meeting from 6:30 onwards. May and I typically didn't get home until around 5 or 5:30. Since Kawas was a dinner gathering, I didn't have to worry about cooking, but May, my wife of 4 years, always had some last-minute tasks she needed me to handle before I could leave. The real challenge, however, was my own struggle. According to May, she was 3 months pregnant and dealing with wild hormones. Despite her pregnancy, she remained the captivating woman I had married, now with the radiant glow of impending motherhood. It was especially difficult for me to tear myself away from her, even for a brief evening. She was perfect to me, standing at 5 feet 3 inches, weighing 110 lbs, with light brown hair and stunning blue eyes. Her physical appearance complimented me, but I cherished her for much more than just her looks. She possessed a sharp wit and keen observational skills, though her beauty certainly didn't hurt. Regardless, I had to be out the door by 6:10 to make it to the meeting on time, which meant rushing through a shower, getting dressed, giving May a quick kiss, and then heading out. I usually didn't return home until after 11, often closer to midnight. Tonight's meeting didn't seem like it would be any different. After a hurried shower, I threw on some slacks and a sports shirt, grabbed my briefcase, and made my way through the kitchen to the garage, planting a kiss on the back of May's neck and giving her a reassuring squeeze to steady her. I reluctantly left her behind and headed out. It was tempting to skip the meeting, not just for May's sake, but also because I had a project underway in the garage. I had been installing a baby monitor for the nursery to be, estimating that it would take me about 30 minutes to finish and then proudly show it off to my wife. She always appreciated my small accomplishments, and I didn't mind soaking in the praise, even if it was somewhat misplaced. After all, I was a guy, and a little ego stroking from my woman didn't hurt. As I settled into the car, I activated the garage door opener and started the engine. While the car purred to life, I placed my briefcase on the seat beside me and double-checked that I had everything I needed. Cell phone, calculator, notebook, all accounted for. Then I reversed out of the garage and down the driveway, waving to May through the kitchen window as she washed dishes. She waved back as I reached the street. Before I could shift the car into gear or even close the garage door with a remote, my cell phone rang, halting all movement. As I answered it, greeting the caller, I glanced up to wave to May one more time, but she had already disappeared from view. The voice on the other end conveyed that I was caught at a good time. The caller informed me that tonight's meeting was canceled. Our president, Patrick, along with Everett and Jules, had been called out of town. With the key officers absent, it was decided to cancel this month's gathering. There was nothing planned for tonight unless I had something urgent. Needless to say, I was relieved to have the evening free. I simply reversed back into the garage, noticing that May's face hadn't reappeared in the kitchen window of our 3-bedroom home. She later admitted she hadn't left the kitchen, anticipating my return to surprise her. If she had been anywhere else, she wouldn't have heard me drive back into the garage. After entering the garage, I finally closed the garage door and then sat in the car, taking a few minutes to relax. I decided to order pizza for dinner tonight, instead of cooking myself, allowing me to focus on finishing the monitor. All aspects regarding the camera and the nursery were completed, except for some garage connections and final testing. The nursery's cosmetic adjustments were minor. The camera, mounted discreetly in a corner, had gone unnoticed by May for 10 days due to its small size. I'd attend to those tasks another time. May had mentioned casually how convenient a nursery monitor would be for checking on the baby while it napped, prompting me to wire the house accordingly. I also opted to install sound monitors in each room. The idea for the visual monitor in the baby's room came from seeing some equipment a friend was discarding. While the main controls were in our bedroom, I installed a secondary set in the garage where I spent a fair amount of time working, complete with speakers and an old TV, acting as the video monitor. This setup allowed for flexible monitoring of the nursery from anywhere in the house. As mentioned, the project was nearly complete, needing only a minor adjustment before I could surprise May and unwind for the night. I decided to try completing the work before relaxing in front of the TV or spending time with May. I stepped out of the car and began checking my work. After about 20 minutes, everything seemed to be functioning properly, so I began testing the sound feeds. Each could be controlled individually, or I could route them all to the 5 second-hand speakers above my workstation. Testing them one by one, starting with the living room, they all worked perfectly, with impressive sensitivity. I could even hear May showering in the master bedroom. I set them all to be live and feeding into the garage, then proceeded to make the final connections for the video monitor. I got somewhat lost in my wiring checks when I heard someone speaking through the living room speaker, sounding like May on the phone. Curious, I turned up the sound and found it to be perfectly clear. The $12 spent on the 5 speakers was indeed a bargain. May conveyed to Roger through the speaker that it would be appreciated if he could be there by 7. My wife's voice affirmed, "It's on, lover." In response, Roger assured May, "Okay, love, I'll see you then. Don't you dare be late. We won't have near enough time as it is, and no, don't figure on getting a repeat." After a brief pause, May giggled and hung up the phone. What was that about? Who was Roger? The only Roger I knew was Roger Jenkins, Crystal's husband. Crystal was May's college roommate and still her best friend. Roger and I got along well. He was a fun guy. I guessed he and May were planning something for Crystal. Well, I'd find out soon enough. It was only 15 minutes until 7. Abandoning speculation, I pressed the camera's on button in the baby's room and reclined with a satisfied smile. The monitor displayed the spare bedroom, where the camera focused on the queen-sized bed, surprisingly made up with turned-down sheets. It was the first time I'd seen May do this without expecting guests. Adjusting the video controls, I zoomed the camera in and out. At the widest zoom, everything in the bedroom was visible, except the corner where the camera was fixed near the ceiling. Leaving it at that setting, I critically examined the clear image, capturing the door, window, closet, and the well-framed bed. Content with my work, I started tidying my workbench, pleased with the sound and picture system I had created. Retrieving a beer from the old refrigerator, I relaxed in my $150 recliner, a garage edition my wife wouldn't allow in the house but fit perfectly in the garage. Almost finishing the beer, contemplating ordering pizza and planning to surprise May, the front doorbell interrupted my thoughts. A moment later, May greeted the visitor and expressed her impatience. She invited Roger to come in, mentioning they had until 10:30 before it was over. May assured him that until then, she was his all the way. The shock didn't come from the words, but from the husky tone in my wife's voice, a sound I'd only heard in our bedroom or on our way there. It was her closeness, her seductive voice. Choking on the last sip of beer, I sat up abruptly. The front door closed and May's voice continued, informing Roger that, judging by the bulge in his pants, she wasn't the only one who had a hard time. "It looks really good," she said, asking him to come over and give her a real hello. Roger responded, and a few grunts and moans followed. Then May's voice again, directing him not to stay there, but to come back to our room because she had it all set up for them. I felt sick to my stomach. It seemed like May was leading him back to our bedroom. Confused and unsure of what to do, my initial urge was to burst into the kitchen and eject Roger from the house. But what was the reality? I took a deep breath. It couldn't be what it sounded like. May and I were deeply in love, and I was certain she had been as faithful as I had been. While she teased me about admiring other women, I knew it was just harmless looking. I never felt the urge to stray, and we were compatible lovers. She always had everything she desired in our closeness moments. Multiple climaxes were her norm, and I made sure to satisfy her until she indicated otherwise. This had to be a misunderstanding on my part. She was my best friend, and we were expecting a baby together. Sitting in the worn-out lounger, I noticed movement on the baby's room monitor. The door opened, and May gently directed Roger into the room with the prepared bed, maneuvering him to the other side, between the bed and the window. She swayed back to stand in front of the closed closet doors, looking across the bed at Roger and almost directly into the camera. May wore her worn-out Saturday-Sunday morning robe, reaching just mid-thigh. However, her hair was styled in a sophisticated bun atop her head, accentuating her slender throat. With just the right amount of makeup, she resembled a princess, except for the ratty old worn-out robe. On her feet were the high-heeled slippers I had gifted her for her birthday 2 months ago, although she wore them that evening, and I had complimented how they enhanced her legs. I couldn't recall seeing them outside her closet since then. As soon as this thought hit me, I realized I hadn't spotted them out of her closet since then, and I felt like I was on the verge of tears. This couldn't be happening. Across the bed from one of my best friends, my wife stood tall and proud, making direct eye contact. Her hands slowly rose to the robe's throat, and with her left hand she held it closed at the neckline. Using her right hand, she unsnapped each button, allowing the robe to billow out, teasing Roger with glimpses inside. Undoing all the buttons while continuing to hold the robe closed, she brought her right hand back to her throat. Using both hands, she slowly peeled the robe open, standing for a moment to let us admire the vision framed by the robe. Then, she let her hands drop, shrugging her shoulders, allowing the robe to drop and puddle around her feet. She was wearing the lingerie I had given her on Valentine's Day, which she had modeled for me on that special day. Since then, I had not seen it. Still maintaining eye contact with Roger, she raised a hand and gestured for him to come to her. As he turned around the bed, I observed my former friend's stunned face. He stammered that he was expecting to be with May tonight, but she had made it really special for him. He expressed how beautiful she was, mentioning, "God, but you are beautiful." They both disrobed. Suddenly emerging from my day's depression, I knew I would need proof of the unfolding situation. After a moment of thought, I hastened into the now empty living room, working quietly and quickly. Obtaining a fresh SD card, I returned to the garage, connected it to the monitor, and switched everything back on. The monitor displayed Roger and my wife, and tears welled up as I watched them move to the bed, embracing tightly. They engaged in an act of intimacy that seemed to last forever, with Roger driving into her relentlessly. After about 15 minutes, she attempted to pull away. Staring at the distressing scene on the monitor, I stood up and began pacing. I knew that entering the house would lead to a violent outcome. I felt sick to my stomach and completely unable to decide what to do next. "Roger, unless you want Gary to walk in on us, you have to go now," May said. She bent, picked up his clothes, and handed them to him, gathering the remains of the lingerie she had given him, along with herself, placing everything on the dresser. I watched as May threw on her old robe and stripped the sheets off the bed, not even waiting for Roger to finish dressing before bundling them up and taking them to the washer in the laundry room between the kitchen and garage. Upon her return to the living room, Roger was present, and with the boastful, melodious tone men often adopt, he greeted her. He expressed that it was great and suggested they talk about doing it again. She replied firmly, stating that she meant it when she said just the once and only because of their deal. Roger acknowledged her decision, adding, "Perhaps for old time's sake too." He expressed understanding, saying that it was just for once, but if she ever thought about how great it was, maybe they could try it again. I heard the sounds of another sloppy kiss before Roger's footsteps seemed to fade as he went to the door. I could hear the impatience in my wife's voice and the little sounds she was making, but it didn't register at the time. Nor did the exhalation she made when she finally followed him to the door. Literally sick to my stomach, I lay back in the ratty recliner, looking at the now empty bedroom showing on the monitor. Glancing at my watch, I saw it was 10:37. They had stayed to their time schedule very well. I heard Roger murmuring something at the door, and I clearly heard May reply that it was just the one time and only because of their agreement so many years ago. She emphasized that I was her husband, her lover, and the man she wanted in her life. She expressed uncertainty about why they did it now and mentioned that Crystal, despite being okay with this, was her best friend and more important than an affair. She questioned Roger about Crystal's importance to him. I couldn't understand Roger's mumble, but I heard another kiss, and then the door shut quietly. Almost immediately, I heard the lock click home. If I hadn't been so filled with tears and despair, I think the exhaustion in Roger's voice after his session with my wife would have been funny. At the moment, it certainly didn't seem funny at all. After the door shut, May reappeared in the spare bedroom. I couldn't seem to think of it as the baby's room anymore. She quickly went over the room, carefully making sure nothing was amiss after the tryst. Gathering up her clothes, she disappeared into the hall. And I soon heard her in our bedroom. I listened to her shower, and then she was out, and I heard the bed rustle. It sounded like my wife had gone to bed. Glancing at my watch, I saw it was almost 11. I just sat and stared into space. I had no idea where my life and my wife were going from here. I only knew I was heartsick. Thoughts and ideas crowded through my head. In some, I thought of things that would excuse my wife for what she had done. In others, I answered the excuses. And yet, in others, I asked myself what I had done to cause May to need another man. Sometime after midnight, I wearily arose and turned the electronics off. Entering the house through the garage door, I headed directly to the master bedroom. Passing the spare room where my wife had been with Roger, I glanced in. The room was just as I had last seen it Monday evening. The bed was stripped, and nothing seemed out of place. There was nothing to tell that anything had taken place. Groaning to myself, I entered my bedroom. Glancing at my sleeping wife, I went to the bathroom, brushed my teeth, and did my business. Stripping off my clothes and leaving them in the dirty clothes hamper before dropping them in, I glanced in, and the hamper was empty. No soiled lingerie there. When I climbed into bed, my wife rolled over and threw an arm over me. She sleepily asked how my night had been. After a moment's silence, I told her it had been very traumatic, but I would tell her about it later. Usually, she snuggled up to me. Tonight, however, she just lay quietly, pulling her arm back and rolling over with her back to me. She seemed to fall back asleep immediately, though, listening to her breathing. I thought she was still awake. I just rolled away from her, then stared into the darkness. I don't know how much I slept that night. I couldn't remember actually sleeping at all. When the alarm went off, I just lay there. I was certainly in no shape to go to work. Telling May I thought I had the flu, I stayed in bed until I heard her car leave for work. I got up and began carefully opening drawers, being sure not to displace anything as I searched May's dresser. In the bottom drawer, folded and stored in a paper bag and under some sweaters, was the lingerie Roger had enjoyed. I pulled them out, noting the lap of the ruined underwear was still damp. After calling in sick to my boss, I played back the tape I had recorded the previous night. Initially, I fast-forwarded through it, avoiding a rehash of the experience and ensuring the tape's quality. However, as time passed, I began to notice details I had overlooked initially. The morning was spent scrutinizing the video content, and I made 2 duplicate kits along with 2 phone calls. Upon returning home, I realized I hadn't eaten since the previous day's lunch. Missing dinner and feeling queasy about breakfast, I skipped meals. When May arrived at her usual time, around 4:30, she came in to kiss me. I turned away, prompting her to give me a peculiar look. Eventually, at 5:30, I decided to confront the issue head-on. There was no sense in delaying it further, only causing more distress for myself. I asked May if she could spare a few minutes to show her what I had been doing for the baby monitor we were discussing. Her response was to wait until after dinner because she was just about to put it on. I picked up my cell phone and inquired about her dinner preference. She suggested Chinese, and I promptly ordered it for delivery. Then, I brought her into the bedroom, demonstrating the controls on the console behind the door. I left the sound on, moving from room to room while communicating with her over the monitor. Although she couldn't respond, the smile on her face upon my return indicated that it was working better than planned. Turning on the video feature, I instructed her to wait and watch. I then stepped into the spare room and stood where she had been the previous night. I grimaced and mimicked a slow bump and grind before returning to our bedroom. She exclaimed, "Gary, that's perfect! When did you get this going?" I responded that I got it going this afternoon, actually, the previous night. She wore a puzzled smile, seemingly trying to recall when I had found time to set it up. I told her there was one more thing to show her and took her hand, leading her to the garage. I explained that since I spend a lot of time there, I thought it was a good idea to have a monitoring station to cover the baby when she has to go out. Then I activated the system in the garage. Recalling something from the night before, I added, "One thing, let me show you how it works." I inserted a USB drive into the TV. "Watch the bedroom and see what happens," I told her. Watching the monitor, we saw the same view as from our bedroom, the initial scene of an empty room, though now the bed was unmade. Then I used the remote to turn on the TV, and the picture immediately changed to show May on her knees before Roger. Glancing at her face, I saw the color drain from it, and she seemed to sway before catching her balance. She looked suddenly at me, and I just stared into her eyes, then pushed fast forward, stopping in just a couple of seconds. I gestured for her to watch the screen again. When she looked back, she saw Roger grabbing at her underwear. Although there was no sound, we could see May say something to him. We both watched, and then heard the small scream she gave, which I now realized was pain. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw tears running down May's face, and also noticed the slight cringe when she saw again the rough way Roger had driven himself into her. Stopping the video, I asked if she wanted to see any more. My wife just looked helplessly at me. I requested May to come inside the house. Feeling the need for a serious conversation and uncertainty about where things were headed, I guided her into the kitchen, where I seated her at the kitchen table and took a seat at the end of the table next to her. May mumbled through tears that she could explain, and I responded that I needed an explanation. I asked about the explanation, questioning May about a promise she made to Roger back in college. I wanted to know how many years ago she had promised herself to him. May began to explain, saying it wasn't like that. She and Roger had been dating while he had a reputation as a lady executor. May mentioned that she started rooming with Crystal, and Roger began dating both of them for a while. She elaborated on the dynamics between Crystal, Roger, and herself, mentioning that Roger and Crystal were heading toward a serious relationship. May recounted a conversation with Roger one night in her room where they got more risque as they drank. In that conversation, she revealed to Roger that the only reason they hadn't been intimate was her fear of getting pregnant. May explained Roger's expectation for his partners to be on the pill and mentioned her reluctance to be too liberal with her favors. May continued her explanation, recalling that she and Roger argued, and she wrote a promissory note stating that if she could be sure he couldn't get her pregnant, she would spend an evening in bed with him. When she paused, I was staring incredulously at her. "How long ago was this?" I asked. "About 6 years," was her answer. May went on to tell me that the note was one of the jokes between Roger and her ever since. Then we broke the news of her pregnancy to Roger and Crystal 2 weeks ago, and after the initial congratulations, Roger and I had gone into their garage to look at a problem he was having. Once I was out of the room, Crystal had looked her in the eye and told her the promissory note must now be due. May was shocked that Crystal even knew about it, and stunned to discover that Crystal was taking it seriously. When Roger and I came back, I remembered a case of Dutch beer I had been going to bring to the cookout, insisting it would only take a few minutes to get something special. I left the other 3 there and went home alone to pick up the beer. While I was gone, Crystal had raised the topic of the note again. May was surprised again to find that Roger had apparently believed the note was going to be honored. He was quite indignant to hear May was thinking of welshing on the agreement. This was all taking place after 3 hours of steady drinking, the last she would have until our baby finished breastfeeding. May found herself agreeing to honor the old note before I returned. It had been decided between the 3 of them that she would entertain Roger last night. I expressed to May that her story was one of the strangest I've ever heard, and it was challenging for me to accept. I asked her who the father of the baby she was carrying was. May shrank, and tears began falling down her cheeks again. My next question was about how many other notes were now outstanding and how many she had paid up on to date. May screamed at me saying there were none and pleaded with me, "Gary, don't. I love you, Gary." She assured me that it was a singular instance and wouldn't recur. May pleaded with me to hear her out, acknowledging that trying to explain might sound absurd, but she felt obligated to do so. She emphasized that it wasn't planned or desired, and she had never been unfaithful to me. May pleaded with me to believe her. She dropped to her knees in tears, covering her face. I asked May if I could ask her some questions, and if she would be honest. She responded affirmatively, urging me to ask her. May emphasized that it was a one-time thing and not something she wanted to do. She admitted that doing it seemed incredible to her now, but I was worth more to her than life. I gazed at her kneeling before me, my heart aching and my stomach in knots. This was my best friend, the person I wanted beside me for life, but I had to know if she was who I thought she was. I asked May if she could have said no to this. She replied that she could have, but she felt her honor was involved. May explained that she was afraid to tell me, fearing that I wouldn't understand. She expressed that she felt if I were in her place, I would do the same thing. She clarified that when the agreement was made, she was drunk, but when she was sober, she didn't throw it out. When it was made, she didn't know me, and it wasn't something she did to cheat on me. It was something she promised to a friend so dear at the time in that place, and she believed it was right. After pondering, I responded that she could have said no after sobering up, but felt it was right and owed a debt to the man her friend became over these years. I asked if that was correct, and she affirmed it. I asked her to think carefully if this was something she was looking forward to, and she replied with a shout that after a while, she began thinking it wasn't real, just a joke. However, she realized it wasn't a joke, it was real. Staring into her eyes, I inquired about the past 2 weeks, whether she was looking forward to it. May took a deep breath and answered that she wasn't. She explained it was something she felt she had to do out of obligation, not pleasure. I continued to look at her, and May, looking down at the table, whispered, "Okay, yes, Gary, I guess I was looking forward to it, but not in the way you might be thinking." She clarified that she had never thought of cheating on me, never wanted to. However, all of a sudden, this situation was there. She felt she had to go through with it, and if she did, she saw no reason not to enjoy it. She stressed that she never felt it was something she had to do because I was not enough for her. It was something she had to honor, so she rationalized that she might as well make it special because nothing like it would ever happen again. Taking a shuddering breath, I let it out slowly. I brought up a memory about 6 weeks ago when I called May on my cell phone while driving back from a conference. We teased for a few minutes, and then I asked her to meet me at the Holiday Inn in Atherton. I suggested making it a weekend away from home, maybe having some fun. I asked if she remembered, and she responded affirmatively, mentioning it was a great weekend with a tremulous smile. I then questioned if she wanted to make that a great weekend for us, for me. May expressed, "What a question." Of course I did, and it was. We had a great time, giving me a genuine smile this time. I followed up by asking if she recalled what she packed for that weekend. She mentioned taking a nice dress in case we wanted to go dancing, which we did, and some comfortable clothes to walk in. I told her to wait a minute, explaining that I needed to turn the video on again to help her understand what this question was about. I turned and walked back to our bedroom, checking midway down the hall to ensure she was following me and she was still there. I powered up the bedroom TV and pressed play on the remote. The scene unfolded with May still kneeling before Roger. She rose and turned to the bed, facing the camera in the corner, capturing her actions. I inquired about what she was wearing, and blushing, May replied that she had on her white lingerie, the set from Valentine's Day. She mentioned that I had never seen her wear it for me except when she modeled it after I gave it to her. May explained that there had been no place to wear it and then paused, looking confused. I reminded her that she didn't wear it at the Holiday Inn. She changed into a peasant skirt and a white blouse. Later, she wore white cotton underwear and a bra, probably the same ones she had on now. I asked if she recalled what she wore to bed that night, and in a small voice she replied that she wore her Donald Duck t-shirt. Looking into her eyes, I questioned May about the holiday weekend, stating that she mentioned it was special, and the date with Roger wasn't. Yet I pointed out that she wore one of the handsomest things she owned, something I bought for us to share, with Roger, not for me. I inquired how special she thought she was placing me. May slumped her shoulders and just looked at me. I continued, expressing that if I didn't love her, we wouldn't be living in this house together. I emphasized that if I didn't think she was something special to me, I wouldn't be married to her. I recounted an unexpected call that canceled my meeting the previous night, leading me into one of the worst nightmares I could conceive. Roger, one of my best friends, if not my very best friend, showed up when I should have been in my meeting. My woman, May, greeted him at the door and took him to a room she had gone to some trouble preparing for a tryst, giving him a strip tease. I observed that she dressed her body to display something she hadn't done for me in well over a year. When I questioned her about it, she claimed the meeting wasn't important to her, but she'd gone to a lot of trouble dressing, putting up her hair, and applying makeup, something she hadn't done for me since Hector was a pup. This indicated to me that the meeting was crucial to her, considering it a treat she had to prepare for. It also suggested that her time with me was ordinary and of much lesser value. I saw her doing things for Roger that she only did for me on special occasions, if then, and doing some things for him that she had refused to do with and for me. Tears welled up in my wife's eyes, and she blinked them away. She insisted that it wasn't like that, and expressed her love for me, emphasizing how much I meant to her. Seating myself on the bed, I gazed at her and stated that I wasn't sure yet what steps we could take. However, I mentioned that I planned to call Roger and Crystal, asking them to come over that evening. I questioned May about Crystal's awareness of the situation and then proceeded to dial their number. Crystal answered, and I requested their presence for a brief meeting that evening. While I was on the call, May handled the Chinese food delivery at the door. Despite having no appetite, I forced myself to eat, anticipating a lengthy and emotional night ahead. May idly toyed with her food, and for a moment, I almost believed her reassurances that it was a one-time occurrence and that she still loved me. Around 7:15, the doorbell rang. Before opening the door, I told May that I suspected there was more to this situation than she realized. As I welcomed Roger and Crystal inside, both flashed smiles at me. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that each of them shared a subtle, knowing smile with May. Roger especially seemed possessive in his gaze toward my wife, and I noticed May cringe slightly upon encountering it. As we all settled on the couch, I gestured for May to join them, pointing to the couch beside Crystal, but she opted for her recliner to the side. I rambled on about various topics, including the new monitoring system I had been developing. I refrained from disclosing its functionality or what had happened the previous night. Crystal and Roger appeared puzzled, questioning why they were summoned. Eventually, I broached the topic, jokingly offering drinks to lighten the mood. Everyone accepted, and I served each of them their preferred beverages: Crystal's white wine, Roger's Jack Daniels and 7-Up, May's orange juice due to her pregnancy, and what looked like my gin and tonic, but was pure tonic. I settled onto a hassock near the TV, needing to maintain some semblance of composure. Surveying everyone, I finally asked Crystal what her motivation was in setting up the situation. She appeared puzzled and inquired about what I meant. I clarified my question, asking why she had worked so hard to arrange everything. As I finished speaking, Roger sputtered and choked on his drink. Turning my gaze to him, I continued, acknowledging that I understood what he gained from it, but questioning if there was more to it. Attempting to focus on both women simultaneously, I switched my eyes back and forth. Addressing Roger, I expressed my concern about his reputation as a playboy, suggesting that one more conquest didn't seem worth the risk. He stumbled in his response, explaining that he was at home the previous night when my meeting was called off. He mentioned being in the garage during my appointment with May, and when I arrived to support his claim, he turned on the TV to show the live feed from the camera in the spare room, which I had just finished setting up before he came over. I remarked on the quality of the picture, pointing out the timing of its installation. May had her face buried in her hands, and Roger's face went pale. Crystal looked at me with a seductive smile. Continuing, I questioned the purpose of the whole situation. Crystal crossed her legs, and her foot began bouncing up and down. She asked what I thought it meant. I replied, mentioning her reputation and Roger's, noting that despite them being straightforward with us, I had received some comments at the last social gathering. I expressed relief that they hadn't said anything to us, but I anticipated that was about to change. Crystal confirmed that this wasn't the ideal way to bring it up, but agreed that it was time to address the matter. I glanced over at my puzzled wife, May. Up to now, I thought she was aware of this, but now I'm not so sure. May's friend and her husband, Roger, had been involved in a key club for the past couple of years. They met on Friday nights at Barney's Broiler. A group of them gathered in a back room for dinner, where each couple brought a house key with their address on it. They dropped the keys into a barrel similar to the ones used in bingo games. After dinner, the wives left and went to their own homes to get ready for some closeness time with a partner other than their usual one. Meanwhile, the husbands drew a key. As per the rules, each guy got to look at the address. If it was his own, he held it in his left hand, pulled out another key, and dropped his wife's key back into the barrel. Some guys might check out an address, and if it was with someone they had recently been with or didn't like, they'd draw another key. However, they could only draw twice. If they pulled their wife's key the second time, they were out of luck. The guys then had a drink before heading off for the weekend rendezvous. It wasn't just for a couple of hours or a night, it was the entire weekend. Crystal and Roger, being close to us, led others in the key club to believe we were involved in swapping with them on the side. Many other guys expressed interest in May, not just Roger. As I shared these details, the room fell silent, and I carefully observed each of my companions. May was gaping at me, clearly surprised and shocked. Crystal wore a simpering smile, her foot bouncing anxiously. Roger looked smug and somewhat relieved after hearing my description. Before we proceed any further, May, there's something you should know about your lover from last night, I said. May's face paled once again as I recounted the situation, and it was evident she didn't want to be reminded of the delicate state of our marriage. I mentioned that Roger was well endowed, and her face turned completely red. She buried her face in her hands, stealing a glance at Roger, whose smug look remained, accompanied by one of the biggest grins I had ever seen. I felt the need to address the condescending look he had given me before the night was over. I shared my understanding that Roger was considered the prize at these drawings. All the wives anxiously awaited to see if they had drawn the highly regarded partner for the weekend, akin to the way it worked for college co-eds, as you described. Glancing at everyone's faces once more, I added that May had already experienced the best. Roger was smirking at me, and when I looked at Crystal, she was smirking at May, who seemed to be sinking into her chair, looking at me a little sickly. Leaning back on my hassock, I took a long drink of my tonic, pretty bitter, but that's what my mouth tasted like anyway. Then I sat and let the silence build. Roger still looked very satisfied with himself, but it seemed to me that Crystal wanted to say something. I kept quiet, allowing the tension to build some more. Crystal began by explaining that their arrangement was a good deal, adding spice to marriages to keep the love alive. According to her, it prevented staleness and tiredness from setting in. She suggested that loosening up could bring a boost to our relationship, making us closer. Roger, in response, just grinned his usual grin. She continued, expressing the belief that it wouldn't affect our friendship and that it could introduce new ideas for the bedroom. Crystal assured us there was no pressure, urging us to think about it and stating that they would be there whenever we made up our minds. In response to this introduction and confession, I appreciated Crystal's patience, but made it clear that I hadn't discussed this with May and had no intention of doing so. I expressed disinterest in swapping or seeking another partner for lovemaking. I highlighted that May and I were intelligent, well-read, and imaginative individuals who didn't need unconventional methods to improve our intimate life. I shared my hope for enjoying our life together for many more years. However, my tone changed as I addressed a more serious concern. I pointed out that Roger didn't practice safe sex, and this troubled me. I emphasized that May, now pregnant with our child, would need to visit the doctor to check for STDs, creating a difficult situation for both of us. I explained that we couldn't engage in intimate activities until she was checked and proved negative to prevent any potential transmission between us. I made sure May understood the gravity of the situation. Looking at our former best friends, I expressed a sense of betrayal, uncertain about which of them had angered me more. Regardless, I conveyed that we would have to halt our gatherings for the foreseeable future. I powered off the TV, ejected the USB drive, and handed it to May. She crumpled several sheets of today's unopened newspaper, lit a match, and set them ablaze in the fireplace. After adding the drive to the pile, we stood together watching the fire consume and burn, until only black ash remained where the thumb drive had been. Turning around, I observed that both Roger and Crystal were now unconscious. I remarked that the chemical had worked before making a phone call to Lopez. 3 hours later, at 11 p.m., the doorbell rang. Welcoming Lopez, I pointed to the two limp bodies and confirmed that the package was ready. Lopez inquired if I had something for him, and I gestured toward the two individuals on the floor. Lopez went outside and returned with 7 more men. They picked up Crystal, and as they moved toward Roger, I asked them to halt. Retrieving a baseball bat from upstairs, I stated that I needed just a few swings. Lopez nodded and Roger was placed on the ground. I explained my plan to target specific points, kneecaps, ankles, and the two sensitive areas, all done in a few swift moves. May stood there, mouth agape. I expressed a desire to hear screams, but acknowledged that Roger was unconscious. The group took him away, and Lopez returned to sit with me after 5 minutes, thanking me for the samples. I responded that it was my pleasure. May remained seated, her mouth still open. After Lopez left, the night was cold, and May approached me, asking what would happen to our former friends. I responded in a cold, flat voice that they were going to Mexico to help some medical students practice. May questioned what would occur if someone looked for them, and I assured her that Lopez would handle it. I coldly mentioned that she had eliminated them, expressing my indifference to her feelings. I argued that I had no right to be judged and emphasized that I had ensured their usefulness to society. May was visibly shaken. I informed her that my earlier promise about us returning and having a physical relationship was a lie. The next morning, we would conduct a DNA test for the unborn child, and if the results showed I was the father, I would assist with the birth. However, we would not remain married. She wouldn't take any lovers until our son was 10 years old, or I would ensure she became very useful. We would file for divorce in the evening, with her getting the house and my financial support until she found a job. May nodded, expressing surprise at discovering this side of me, and I walked away, stating that I didn't know it either. The following day, we filed for divorce, and 3 weeks later, we received the DNA report confirming I was the father. Months later, we finalized the divorce, and 2 months after that, my son was born. I spent a lot of time with him, maintaining occasional conversations with May. However, I could never love her again. She adhered to the agreement, refraining from taking any lovers, and I supported her financially for 5 years until our son could care for himself. I didn't date during this time, channeling all my energy into my son. Lopez expressed his gratitude with a significant thank you gift, and no one came looking for the 2 samples I had sent.